October 1861. 3 months have passed since the embarrassing Union defeat at the Battle of Bull Run, or Battle of Manassas as it was called in the South. Since the humiliating defeat at Bull Run, activity in the Eastern Theater, particularly in northeastern Virginia, had been regulated to minor skirmishing and picket firefights along the Potomac River. On July 26, President Lincoln replaced Brigadier General Irvin McDowell as commander of the Union Army forces around Washington, D.C., with a young and promising officer, Major General George Brenton McClellan, whose campaigns in Western Virginia have ended in victory after victory. Since taking command of the Union Army forces around Washington, General McClellan has radically changed and restructured the Army, transforming it from a ragtag mob of militiamen into a professionally trained army of volunteer soldiers. He also rebrands his new command as the Army of the Potomac. In months since the battle along Bull Run, everything has been, in the words of General McClellan, all quiet along the Potomac. This is about to change. Guarding the Potomac River crossings and passages along northern Virginia and Maryland beyond the town of Leesburg is Union Brigadier General Charles Pomeroy Stone's Corps of Observation. Recent activity by the Confederate Army of the Potomac under Joseph E. Johnston in and around Leesburg has indicated to General McClellan that it may be possible to capture the important town in a light offensive across the river. Reports indicate that Leesburg is lightly defended by a single brigade under the command of Colonel Nathan G. Shanks Evans, a veteran of the Battle of Manassas. On October 20th, McClellan sends a telegram to General Stone informing him of a reconnaissance mission conducted by Brigadier General George A. McCall's Division of Pennsylvania Reserves, and directing him to keep a good lookout upon Leesburg to see if this movement has the effect to drive them away. Perhaps a slight demonstration on your part would have the effort to move them. Taking these orders to heart, General Stone orders a reconnaissance mission across the Potomac River by 20 volunteers from the 15th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment under Captain Chase Philbrick, who row across the river at Harrison's Island onto the Virginia side that evening. They return reporting a Confederate camp positioned near Leesburg. With this information in hand, General Stone decides to follow McClellan's orders for a slight demonstration and orders his Corps of Observation to begin crossing the river the next morning. On the morning of October 21st, 1861, exactly 3 months after the Union's disastrous defeat at Bull Run, the stage is set for the next major battle of the Eastern Theater as the lead elements of Stone's division begin crossing the Potomac near Harrison's Island in small rowboats, climbing up the steep cliffs of Ball's Bluff to engage the Confederate camp. While the attack on Ball's Bluff commences, a feint maneuver will be conducted by Brigadier General Willis A. Gorman's 2nd Brigade at Edwards Ferry to throw the Confederates into confusion and disarray. At 6 a.m., Colonel Charles Devens and companies A, C, G, H, and I of the 15th Massachusetts cross the Potomac and begin climbing Ball's Bluff. After reaching the top of the bluffs, Colonel Devens leads his companies in advance to the area near the Jackson House. They leave the 20th Massachusetts under Colonel William R. Lee on the bluff to guard the exit path to the river. As the men from the 15th Massachusetts advance across the fields beyond Ball's Bluff, General Gorman's 2nd Brigade is moving into position to the southeast of Edwards Ferry. Overseen by Major John Mix of the 3rd New York Cavalry, the feint maneuver is going underway as planned, throwing out 2 companies of the 1st Minnesota as a skirmish line. Major Mix approaches Leesburg from the southeast with his troops. His first objective is to advance up the Edwards Ferry Road in order to draw Confederate attention to himself and away from the Ball's Bluff raiding party. His second task is to reconnoiter toward Goose Creek. His group is a very small force for such a dangerous mission. Around 7:30 a.m., after proceeding about 2 miles along Edwards Ferry Road, The Federal horsemen from Companies B, D, E, and I of the 3rd New York Cavalry briefly engage a group of Southern infantry from the 13th Mississippi under Colonel William Barksdale, and both sides open fire with only about 30 yards between them. Unsure of the size of the enemy force, and in accordance with his orders, Major Mix pulls his men back toward the ferry crossing at 7:45 a.m. At the same time that the firefight is ensuing along the Edwards Ferry Road, Colonel Devon's men from the 15th Massachusetts are starting to realize that something is off about their intelligence reports. Instead of finding a massive Confederate camp where it was reported, Colonel Devon finds a row of trees which Captain Philbrick had mistaken as tents the previous evening due to sunlight peering through the woodlands. At 8 a.m., Colonel Devon learns that at least one company of Confederate infantry is on his right flank. The enemy is Company K of the 17th Mississippi, operating on picket duty near Smart's Mill. When he had learned of the crossing of the 15th Massachusetts, the Southern Company commander, Captain William Duff, collected his men and moved between the Union force and Leesburg. What Captain Duff does not know is that his 40 men are about to face 300 Federals. While the two forces meet, Colonel Devon advances Captain Philbrick's Company H to attack them, while Company A circles to the right to get into the rear of the Mississippians. Seeing Company H's approach and worried that he is outnumbered, Captain Duff pulls his men back toward the road to draw the Federal attackers away from their supporting line of battle. Duff's men had been present at the Battle of Manassas 3 months earlier and had experienced some limited action there, so they know how to operate under fire. Their yells to the Federals to halt are quickly ignored, and Duff orders his men to make ready for firing. The Bay Staters of the 15th Massachusetts step within 60 yards of Captain Duff's men. The captain orders his men to fire, unleashing a heavy musket volley on Company H. Colonel Devon then orders Company G forward to reinforce Captain Philbrick's men on the front line. Before that company moves far, however, rebel cavalry is reported on its left. Fearing the troopers would cut off Philbrick's men, Devon recalls them. Captain Duff is also pulling his infantry back about this time. The little skirmish has claimed 1 Federal soldier killed, 9 wounded, and 2 missing. 3 Confederates have fallen wounded. Although it did not amount to much, the sharp little affair serves notice to Colonel Evans that Federals are moving inland from the river in some strength. The skirmish is also valuable for Colonel Devens, for it proves that the enemy is aware of his presence and that he is now in a more vulnerable position. The bloody battalion from the 15th Massachusetts falls back a short distance and then continues all the way to the Bluff, where the 2 supporting companies of the 20th Massachusetts are deployed. Colonel Devon remains there only briefly, however, before moving his 5 companies back to their previous position. An aide informs him that he is to remain there, for the rest of his regiment is on its way to reinforce him. Devon quickly throws out a skirmish line on each flank and across his front. Rather than take direct command of Ball's Bluff sector, Brigadier General Stone orders Colonel Edward Dickinson Baker, a sitting U.S. Senator and a close friend of President Lincoln, to move his 1st California to Harrison's Island and oversee the entire operation. In case of heavy firing in front of Harrison's Island, instructed General Stone, you will advance the California regiment of your brigade or retire the regiments under Colonels Lee and Devens upon the Virginia side of the river at your discretion, assuming command on arrival. Meanwhile, on the Virginia side of the river along the Edwards Ferry Road, Colonel Evans receives a flurry of reports about Federal troops crossing the Potomac at multiple locations. The activity at Edwards Ferry is clearly within view, and Evan could hear the rattling of small arms fire between Captain Duff's Mississippians and Colonel Devon's Massachusetts soldiers earlier that morning. He knows that Brigadier General George McCall's Pennsylvania Reserve Division near Drainesville to the east is no longer a threat, so he can freely deal with the Federal crossings at Edwards Ferry and Ball's Bluff. Because he does not know where the major thrust will be launched, Evans wisely decides to act with caution. Evans reinforced Captain Duff with 4 rifle companies, E and K from the 18th Mississippi, Company D of the 13th Mississippi, and Company I, 17th Mississippi. He also dispatches 3 undersized companies of Virginia cavalry, the Loudon Cavalry, Chesterfield Light Dragoons, and the Madison Invincibles. The entire force is placed under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Walter H. Jennifer, Evans' cavalry commander. The Confederate brigadier retains the balance of the 3 Mississippi regiments at Fort Evans. A 4th regiment, Colonel Eppa Hunton's 8th Virginia, is stationed to the east, guarding Burnt Bridge on the Leesburg-Alexandria Turnpike. At 9 a.m., Colonel Jennifer receives his orders and immediately moves towards Paul's Bluff with approximately 320 men. Stretching the intent of his orders, Colonel Jennifer decides to go over to the offensive with his forces. What he does not know is that by then, the number of Federals have swelled to about 625 with the arrival of the remainder of Colonel Devon's 15th Massachusetts. The Confederates are also sending reinforcements. Evans orders all but Company H of the 8th Virginia to march to the support of Colonel Jennifer's force, though the Virginians do not arrive until after Jennifer had fought the morning's 2nd skirmish. By this time, 11 a.m., Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer's line is facing east and is preparing to attack the Union force. He deploys 1 company of the 18th Mississippi on the skirmish line. Another holds the right side of the line, with Captain Duff's Company K of the 17th Mississippi extending the line left, followed by a company of the 13th Mississippi and the cavalry. It is a long and thin line with gaps between each man. When Jennifer realizes that a stout fence precludes a saber charge by his cavalry against Devon's men, he dismounts 1 cavalry company and sends it forward with the infantry. His men skirmish on foot from behind a fence until Jennifer orders it torn down so that his horsemen can get through and charge the Union force. When they do this, the Federals fall back a short distance and then regroup. Jennifer then pulls his men back as well. Around 11:45 a.m., a lull in the fighting at Ball's Bluff occurs. Southeast of Ball's Bluff, near Edwards Ferry, most of Gorman's brigade is crossing the Potomac as quickly as boats can carry them. Having heard from Colonel Baker that he is crossing more troops at Ball's Bluff, General Stone decides to cross additional troops at Edwards Ferry in case they might be needed. When orders arrive at 12:15 to support Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer's command, the undersized 8th Virginia moves quickly past Fort Evans and forms behind Jennifer's men in a supporting role. The lull in the fighting ends around 12:30 that afternoon as the 8th Virginia arrives on the field. The stage is now set for the day's 3rd skirmish. The Confederates now outnumber Colonel Devon's complete 15th Massachusetts. At 1 p.m., the 8th Virginia begins exchanging musket volleys with the 15th Massachusetts across the battlefield. Using the woods as cover, several of the 8th Virginia companies attempt to envelop the 15th Massachusetts from its flanks. Despite the heavy odds and galling fire, the Bay Staters manage to hold their position and exchange bloody rifle volleys with the 8th Virginia for the next hour, while the 15th Massachusetts is slugging it out with the Virginians and Mississippians. 5 more companies of the 20th Massachusetts reach the bluff on the Virginia side of the river and remain on the eastern edge of the clearing. Around 1:30, the 20th is reinforced by a pair of 12-pounder mountain howitzers, which have been detached from the 2nd New York State Militia and are manned by a mixed crew from that unit and Battery I, 2nd U.S. Artillery. 2nd Lieutenant Frank French of the regular battery commands the 2 howitzers. These small 12-pounder guns, weighing only 500 pounds apiece, are perfect for the close quarters fighting that will occur in the afternoon. Their light weight makes the ascent up the far bank of Ball's Bluff fairly easy. Seeing the guns deploy on the bluff and ready for action tremendously boosts the morale of Union troops. Concerned about Edwards Ferry, where Gorman's brigade has crossed and now potentially threatened the Confederate right flank, Evans dispatches the 13th Mississippi to keep an eye on the Federals. With this, only 2 Confederate regiments are now left in reserve at Fort Evans. From 1:30 to 2 p.m., Colonel Baker begins seeking the best and fastest way to get his troops across the Potomac River. Baker orders his men to find as much rope as they can splice together, so that a line can be stretched across the river to expedite the crossing. Orders also go out to scrounge up as many boats as possible. One is a large canal boat from the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. Between 2:15, Baker personally crosses the Potomac River to Ball's Bluff. Before setting foot on Virginia soil, he already decides to commit his small force to battle. "Hurry up all men you can," Baker yells to one of his regiment commanders. "Get everything that can float. Cross every man you can into Virginia." The men of the 1st California cross next. The unit is part of Colonel Baker's own brigade, designated as the California Brigade. It will later be redesignated as the Philadelphia Brigade, as most of its men are actually from that region of Pennsylvania. Prior to Baker's arrival on the Bluff, one company of the 1st California had already established a foothold for the regiment on the battlefield. Meanwhile, Confederates are keenly watching the buildup on Ball's Bluff. The increased federal activity worries the commander of the 8th Virginia, Colonel Eppin Hunton, whose regiment is running low on ammunition. Using a runner in the form of a local townsman and Loudon cavalry trooper Private Elijah V. Leach White, Colonel Hunton sends several messages to Colonel Evans notifying him of the activity and seeking reinforcements. By 3 p.m., federal reinforcements continue streaming onto the high ground above the Potomac River, including additional companies of the 1st California and a 14-pounder James rifle cannon belonging to the Battery B, 1st Rhode Island Light Artillery, but commanded by 1st Lieutenant Walter Bramhall of Company K, 9th New York State Militia. Baker throws his energies into organizing the federal defense, but the line ultimately formed is a jumbled command affair that seems to ask for trouble. The Federals' line of battle along Ball's Bluff is beginning to shift into an L shape, with companies and battalions from the 15th and 20th Massachusetts and 1st California spread out and dispersed throughout the entire line. Guarding the ravines on the Union left and right flanks are 2 skirmisher companies detached from these regiments. Colonel Baker also throws out 3 skirmisher companies into the woods beyond the bluff to watch for rebel activity. At 3:15 p.m., the Southerners opened the new round of fighting with a spitting fire from across the field, which the Federals promptly returned. The fight is getting underway when the last regiment to actually cross the river, the 42nd New York, reaches the crossing point of Ball's Bluff. Its commander, Colonel Milton Cogswell, is shocked by the chaos he finds there. Also during this time, Colonel Erasmus Burt of the 18th Mississippi arrives with the rest of his regiment to reinforce his companies already engaged in combat. Meanwhile, a steady stream of telegraph messages carry information from Brigadier General Stone to Major General McClellan. Often the messages serve little then to add to the confusion, for the information is often ambiguous and sometimes outright incorrect. At 3:30, Colonel Cogswell advises Colonel Baker that their defensive line is a vulnerable and defective position, as the wooded hills beyond the ravine command the area perfectly, and that if the enemy occupied it, they would virtually destroy Baker's forces. He advises Colonel Baker to make an immediate advance of the whole force to occupy the hills, which are not occupied by the rebels at this point. This advice is dismissed by the senator. Cogswell, frustrated at his advice being ignored by Colonel Baker, places 2 of his arriving companies behind the main line of the 20th Massachusetts and 1st California. While the federal officers are arguing, a wholesale realignment of the Confederate line is taking place in preparation for a renewed attack against the Union formation. While most of the 8th Virginia moves south of the cart path, 2 or 3 of the regiment's companies are on the line's extreme right flank. In the woods ahead of the Virginians are companies A and D of the 1st California. Probing through the heavy terrain to determine the southern strength, they find the right of the 8th Virginia when the Virginians fire on them from the top of the slope behind the field. The rest of the Virginians hear the scattered shooting and open fire through the trees. After receiving several enemy musket volleys, the 1st California companies suffer severely, and within less than 30 minutes, 2/3 of their men. Retreat seems the only option. The death blow to the 1st California occurs around 4:30 p.m. when Colonel Baker is mortally wounded by a bullet from a Confederate sharpshooter in the 8th Virginia. Baker dies shortly after being shot, becoming the only sitting U.S. Senator to ever die in battle. With Baker's death, the 1st California lines fall into complete disarray. At 5 p.m., the Confederates, giving out an ear-piercing rebel yell, launch a general charge into the Union lines. The rebels smashed through the 1st California on the Federals' left flank, with the right being hammered by the charging 17th and 18th Mississippi regiments. The 2 mountain howitzers and the James rifle are captured by the Mississippians, and the Federals begin a mass retreat that soon devolves into a panicked and frenzied rout. With their backs to the bluff and the river, many of the Union soldiers are forced into the water as the Southerners draw near. The boats the Union troops had used to ferry themselves to Virginia were now being packed over capacity in the Federals' desperate escape back to Maryland. As the boats are frantically rowed back towards Harrison's Island, many are soon swamped and capsized in the water. Many of the Federals, including some of the wounded, drowned in the deep river, unable to break free from the grasp of the Potomac's strong currents. While the panicked and routed Federals literally swim for their lives towards the safety of the Maryland shore and Harrison's Island, the Confederates on Ball's Bluff begin to shoot down at them. Many of the Federals are mercilessly gunned down in the Potomac River with their backs to the enemy. A large bastion of about 500 Union soldiers soon become trapped on Harrison's Island in the river, having no means of safely returning to the Maryland shore without fear of being shot by the sharpshooters on the bluff. By 6 p.m. that evening, the Battle of Ball's Bluff was coming to its end as the 17th and 18th Mississippi regiments began to round up stragglers on the Virginia shore and post sentries along the bluff's edge. After dark, volunteers from the 8th Virginia are dispatched down the bluff and conduct the final action of the battle when they complete the capture of the trapped Union force on Harrison's Island. 12 hours after the first Federal raiding party had crossed the Potomac into Virginia, the Battle of Ball's Bluff was finally over. What had started as a small and confused skirmish had quickly escalated into a full-blown battle and another humiliating defeat for the Union in Northern Virginia. A total of 223 Federals had been killed, 226 were wounded, and 553 had been captured on the banks of the Potomac later that night by the 8th Virginia's Volunteer Party. In total, the Union lost around 1,000 men. The Confederates, on the other hand, had suffered relatively light casualties. Of a combined casualty list of 155 men, 36 had been killed, 117 were wounded, and only 2 had been captured. The Battle of Ball's Bluff was another wake-up call for the Union. Many of the dead from the battle floated down the river into Washington, where horrified onlookers saw the aftermath of another embarrassing defeat. Some of the bodies floated as far downriver as Mount Vernon. The battle had alarmed U.S. Congress and led to the creation of the Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War, a body which would provoke years of political infighting between generals and politicians. President Lincoln had lost a close friend with the death of Edward D. Baker, a man who had, just weeks prior, played with Lincoln's children on the front lawn of the White House. In February of 1862, Brigadier General Stone was put on trial for his role in the battle, and was ultimately used as a scapegoat for the losses before being imprisoned. After the Battle of Ball's Bluff, McClellan would begin playing a more cautious role in direct actions against the Confederates until his planned Peninsula campaign aimed at next spring. There would be no further major actions in the Eastern Theater during the winter of 1861-62. Now, the public's attention would begin to shift to new activity in the West.